are live on Facebook and you can join in on the conversation today. The program is Tea or Coffee and you can drop your comments and your contributions as the case may be. What are we talking about today? We are talking about corporate organization laws in Nigeria, everything that has to do with it. And of course, you can follow us on all our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Our Impact TV. And be sure to follow us and subscribe on our YouTube channel at Our Impact TV. Okay, of course, I have Godstime here with me.
Of course.
And she'll do us the honor of introducing our guest today.
Okay, so we have two legal professionals in the house. We have Jeme. We have Jeme in the house. He's a legal practitioner. And we have Barrister Akintayo, also a legal practitioner.
We have
Thank you for joining us. I told you I'm not going to give you my name. I told you.
Okay, yes, we have Eyitayo and Ejeme, yes, in the studio with us. And begin talking about corporate law, organization laws in Nigeria. Okay, now let's start with what corporate organization is and the legal term, the legal meaning of what a corporate organization is. Jeme.
Well, when you say legal meaning, I mean, it's technical, and I take it that people out there are not technical people, so I'll just speak as plainly as possible.
Okay.
Most times you hear people say, I want to go register a business, but then they confuse it as registering a sole proprietorship, which is the same thing as registering a business name. But then when you start talking about a corporate organization, a corporate organization in legal parlance is an entity on its own. It's like a human being, a figurative human being.
Okay.
So basically, it has its own rights. It has its own liabilities. But a business name is the same as the sole proprietor, such that if the business name is in debt, is as good as the sole proprietor being in debt. But then a corporate organization being in debt is not as good as the shareholders being in debt, basically, in very simple terms.
Okay, what do you have to say?
Okay, so in addition to that, usually I prefer to help, like my colleague said, we are discussing, we are relating with non-lawyers.
Okay.
So let's look at it this way. So corporate entity, as the name goes in Nigeria, could be looked at from two dimensions. So the first dimension is the dimension where the corporate entity is embedded in the people or the person that forms the entity. And then the other dimension is where the corporate entity is unique, stands alone, and is different from the people that forms the entity. So you look, for instance, if you're talking about, like you mentioned, business name, because broadly speaking, if you want to do business in Nigeria, you're either talking about you're going to be doing business as a business name owner, or you're going to be doing business, well, the most realistic option is a limited liability company.
Okay.
So if you're looking at those options, you're now saying, okay, a business name simply means that I do not want this entity to be different from me. So, as rightly said by my colleague, that means that the identity is actually in the person, or the partners, as the case could be. But if you're talking about a limited liability company, which is the next realistic option for an entrepreneur, then you're now saying that you want the entity to have its own unique being, different from the founder, as the case may be. So, and then we can wrap it up with this illustration. Usually, we just had election on Saturday.
Yeah.
So we'll say that before you can be classified as an adult to vote or something, you should be at least 18 years old.
Yeah.
However, the beautiful thing about a limited liability company is the fact that the moment it is given birth to, it becomes an adult. It has a life of its own. It has its own liability. It has its assets. It can do things on its own. I think I should stop there.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Thank
for the
you.
sake of clarity, can we talk about different types of?
Yeah, we will. And for the sake of clarity, because we're talking about the entities and the entities, I would say in a layman's language, the
Yeah.
corporate organization has to do with how do I put it now?
Legal bindings.
Legal bindings, basically, because I don't want our viewers to be confused with all the entities and entities and entities.
So basically, it's like the legal aspect that has to do with businesses, be it corporate or whatever. So, okay, so let's talk about types of corporate organizations. Yeah.
Types of corporate organizations. When you say that, can you clarify?
Maybe she's talking about business
The one
name.
I'm
I'm talking about partnership. Yeah.
Okay, so it seems like with your question, answering your question, it seems like I already put the gun before. How do you say the cat before the horse?
Exactly.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So there are different types. You have the business name, which also is also called business enterprise.
Okay.
You have the limited liability company. Yes. You have companies limited by guarantee. You have unlimited companies, and then. Yeah, basically, I'm
And the public company, which is not realistic for an SME
so,
anyway.
Yes, an SME. Usually, you don't start out being a public company. You grow into being that.
Okay.
So those are the basic types. Usually, when you start out in business, you start out depending on what your capital is, depending on if you have people to fund you, you have investors. Most times, you realize in Nigerian setting, people start out as business names, but people who have grit and able to weather the storm are able to transform and transition into limited liability companies. That's where they, as the name implies, limited liability. So they try to protect themselves and limit the amount of liability they will face if the business goes under, for example. So then they transition to being a limited liability company. And that's usually the most advisable form of business. But then, I say most advisable generally, but then starting a business, the type of business you choose is dependent on your intent and purpose.
Okay.
So there are certain types of endeavors you engage in that you can never incorporate as a limited liability company.
Okay.
For example, as a lawyer, you can incorporate as a limited liability company.
Okay.
So you have business, you have the limited liability company, then you have public companies. Most banks in Nigeria are all public. They're public companies. We know when a law came into existence where they mandated that all banks should transition from being limited liability companies to public companies. So we have that. Then we have companies limited by guarantee, and then which you rarely see. I don't know. I think it's Glow.
We
You don't
Apologies.
mention guys. Oh, it's fine.
Yes.
Okay, so still talking about business, I know that there are some requirements. So what are those requirements to set up a business in Nigeria?
Okay.
A legal requirement to set up business in Nigeria.
Okay, so the requirements will depend on the kind of structure, or rather the kind of business option that an entrepreneur is looking at. Okay. So usually, because it's a broad thing, but I like to confine my explanation usually to SMEs to two realistic options: business name or a limited liability company. Now, if you're talking about a business name, because as said earlier on, the focus of a business name is the person that's registered or the partners, as the case may be. So if you're looking at a business name, because it's just about it's a basic form of registration. It is more like, I do not, maybe because of branding, because of packaging, I do not want to do business as me, Eyitayo Ogunyemi. You may not know how to pronounce that name. Why can't I do it in a tush form? You understand?
Yeah.
So it is just, yes, it is just really about, I want to package myself into a name. So that is why it is about and the most elementary form of registration you could have with the Corporate Affairs Commission. I hope you don't mind me mentioning that anyway, because it's a regulatory entity.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Okay, so for that, because it is a basic thing, the requirements are also very minimal. So you talk about details of the owner or the partners, as the case could be. So details could include your full names,
Okay.
your address, date of birth, email, basic details about
Profiles.
the owner or the co-owner.
Okay.
Then you need 2 passport photos.
Okay.
You need a means of identification, which usually must be one of 4 options. It has to either be a national ID card, international passport, voter's card,
Or driver's license. Driver's license?
Driver's license, thank you. But usually, concession is given to forms of identification from maybe other countries. Maybe you have a driver's license from another country or something, but concession is usually given to that. So you find that these are basic things, and then you need to get a name. You do your name search, you do all that. You need to have an address for your company. Now, it's not out of place because as many people that are viewing us, they need to understand that they do not need to go and get a building, so to speak. They could start by using their own personal address.
Okay.
And then as the business scales, they can grow to have a place of address, and then they change the particulars of address with the regulatory agency.
Okay.
Now, that has to do with business name.
Okay.
For a limited liability company, because the focus is on the entity and not the persons forming the entity,
Okay.
the requirements are usually broader. So you're talking about, other than the particulars of the people coming together to form the shareholders, and then, I mean, those that are also going to be the directors. Don't forget that they could, a shareholder could as well be a director, but it's not necessary. So you talk about all the stakeholders in the business, the secretary, the directors, the shareholders.
Okay.
Their particulars should be there. Then because there's also a need for the entity to have a form of regulatory book, which in this case is called the Memorandum and Articles of Association of the business. You talk about spelling out clearly the objects of the business. What are we going to be doing? We want to...
That's the objectives?
Yes,
Objectives,
we want to distribute food products, we want to do this, do that. They put it together. Those things form the objectives. Now, because of the ease of doing business climate that the federal government is trying to establish, the interesting thing is that there are default preparations which CAC has put together for businesses, whereby other than inputting the objects of the business, they could just adopt those forms.
Okay.
So, it talks about the policies, so default policies that they can actually bring together. And then other than that, they need what is called the statutory declaration, which could be done by a notary public or a lawyer. But the interesting thing is that under the new, the proposed law, we are hoping that, that will be done away with.
Okay.
So it will no longer be a requirement. I believe that I've been quite...
You've done justice. But I want to ask, Jeme, for business, when you want to register a business, is it necessary to state how you're going to fund the business when you're trying to register?
A business name, right?
Yes.
Oh, no, it's not necessary to state.
Okay, but for limited liability companies, it's necessary for you to state how you're going to fund
Yeah,
the
because there's a
business.
provision in the forms that requires you to indicate the share capital. That's the basic thing you need to do. But how you go about raising funds is up to you. CAC is not going... Within the law, please, CAC is not going to ask you, who are you going to get this amount of money from? Who are you going to get that amount? Nobody's going to ask you that. But you want to make sure that as you go about trying to get funds, you want to do it legally. You want to do it illegally because you may do it illegally and not get caught. But then there's a thing about doing things illegally, it may catch up with you later. So it's really advisable that you do the right thing. Yeah.
Okay. When he was, I listened to him, he did mention the part where the objective of the business.
Yes,
so what if, for instance, you start up the business and maybe the business, you expand the business and decide to incorporate something else
Into the
that was
business.
not in the objective. And you know, here in Nigeria, when you want to get an office space, they would ask you what you want to do. And you tell them what you want to do. And maybe you try to expand the business or incorporate something else into the business. It could make them ask you to pay more. So I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say. So what happens at that point when you're trying to incorporate something else into the objective of the business that wasn't there in the first place?
Do you need to go back?
Do you need to go back to review it and start all over again? Gemma and you, yeah.
Yeah, we're not. So the idea is I like to think that the law is made for man and man is not made for the law.
Okay.
So what that means in essence is we're not, in as much as we strive to be compliant with what laws say, we also need to think creatively, ways to get around things. Anything that stalls progress as people, you want to find ways to circumvent them. The idea, you should always be thinking progress. So of course, you could start a business today and you think small. I'm a small business person and this is all I want to do, provide porcelains and ceramics for people. But then I expand and I start making so much money, I start amassing profits and I feel, well, I could go into furniture. So that may be part of the things I want to include in my objects that I didn't include before. So yes, you can go back. I think there's a procedure to do that. However, you may want to jump on the opportunity immediately. So you can go ahead and start, but make necessary to regularize your processes as time goes on.
Okay.
So what's the age? Let me ask you, Tayo. The age, is it like must you be a particular age to be able to register a business? Or let's do this way. Let's take a break. Let's take a break. So let's go on a short break. And when we come back, the phone line will be open for you to call in, ask your questions, and contribute as the case may be. We are still live on Facebook, so please do join us. We'll be right back. Stay glued. Do you like the video you just watched? Then you should click on the like button and move over to click on the subscribe button. Also, you should click on the bell to get notified anytime we drop amazing episodes of Tea or Coffee for you. Adios.